Hello, everybody. Welcome back into the record player. I am Scott, as always, and today we are taking a trip back in time when in 1988 I was working at Sam the Record Man in the Bramalea City Center, where I am assuming a large portion of sales of this record initiated. I say that because it was barely ever off our turntables and seemed like with every spin someone would come back and ask, "Who is that?" And it was Roman Gray, two Ottawa friends who had been creating music together since high school and gave us what turned out to be one of my favorite albums of all time called Edge of the Shadow. But it didn't come without its disappointments along the way, and today I get to find out how it happened and why we were only given this one record. It is an absolute pleasure for me to have Ross Roman and David Gray. Welcome to the Record Player, fellas. I appreciate you being with me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Great,
No, no problem at all. We've been trying to do this for a few weeks now, playing interview tag, so I appreciate it. A couple of you were sick. I had a bit of a family issue, so I appreciate you taking your time and being patient here with me. I want to talk obviously about this gem. This is
Alrighty.
Shadow from 1988. I want to talk about that, but before we get there, and what that whole period was like from the beginning of the record, well, from the beginning of the record to touring and to everything that happened afterwards. You guys have been friends for a very long time from Ottawa. How did this whole thing start? How did you guys get together? How did Roman Gray begin?
Roman Gray actually began in the early 80s. Ross and I had moved to Toronto. There's actually two albums, well, EPs we had out before Edge of the Shadow that were released by an independent company out of New York. And the first one was called Look Me in the Eyes. It was back in the days of dance stubs and what have you. And it's a wonderful story. There was a misshipping to some DJ in Milan, Italy, ended up with this record by accident.
By mistake.
Yeah, by mistake.
Shipping guy put the wrong album in a box.
I was going to ask about that. The initial success was by accident.
It was a dance, quotation marks, dance dub. And some DJ, God bless him, I don't know who he is, started playing it in Milan, in the clubs. He was a DJ that would circle around in Milan and play the clubs. Anyway, the dance dub became a hit, and it was #1 in the dance charts in Milan. I mean, it was a really exciting time for us. It was very low budget. It was our first record. And, we were sent a copy of a chart that showed, Michael Jackson, #5, Peter Gabriel, #2, Roman Gray, #1. I still have a copy of that. So that was exciting. That lit the fire. Let's put it that way. We were working with some independent producers out of Toronto that we really loved working with at the time. We did a second record with them maybe 2 years later. And then that just sort of, but financially, nothing, no money generated from any of this. There's various stories attached to that, but we probably don't need to get into. And then in the mid 80s, we formed a band with the same musicians that had played on these first two records. It was always every Roman Gray record, the same musicians, which was wonderful. And Edge of the Shadow just sort of started to materialize in the 80s. I'll hand it over to Ross there.
I think to go further back to Scott's, when I was in high school, I realized around grade 11 that I desperately wanted to be a musician. Mm-hmm. More than anything on earth. Probably I saw Red Hot play at our school, which had Peter Fredette amongst others in it, and what's his name, the guitar player that Jimmy played with, Pat Travers, were in Red Hot. Anyway, I saw them at my school.
Peter Fredette from Kim Mitchell.
Yeah, Max Webster. Yeah, Peter, and anyway, they were like a super band, but they were all like 18, playing rock and roll in our high school, and the girls specifically, but the kids were literally going bananas. And I was, in grade 10, standing there looking at this in my little button-up shirt going, that's what I want to do. So I desperately couldn't figure out how to get into being in bands because I didn't know how to play. And my best friend, Mark Entwistle, was in a band called Chaos, which Dave was in. So I'd go to their rehearsals and I would just sit there, drooling, going, oh my God, this is what I want to do. So I had my eyes on Dave from like the time we were in grade 11 as somebody that I thought was a superstar, musically, right? And eventually I sort of, because I looked the part, skinny guy with long hair. I was given a job as a bass player, and I learned that if you can keep time and you keep your mouth shut, you can play with some really good people. And eventually, I was in the super band in Sir Robert Borden. And so when I graduated Borden, Dave and I got a house together with a couple of other friends. That was really when our friendship started. Was the final day of high school. We took my mother's car. Sorry, Mom. We took my mother's car, bought a bottle of red wine and some other things, and drove around Ottawa looking for a place to live. And that was really the first time we became friends. And right away, we were both like, we got to do music. Like we were both obsessed with music, and so that sort of became the, that would be 1976, Dave, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
It took us
Yeah.
a few years to, we played in bands, some really horrible bands at the Chaudière, like brutally bad. And then we started writing songs, and that was sort of the ticket. Was like, oh, well, let's do this instead. Let's write songs, because that seems to be the way to get somewhere.
What was
Yeah.
it?
And
Sorry, go ahead.
go ahead. No, I was just going to say kudos to Ross's dad, who gave us $300, which was a fortune at the time, so we could go in and make a demo tape at a studio in Ottawa. And of course, those were the days where it cost a lot of money to make a tape.
Yeah,
You couldn't,
$400.
there was no such thing as the home recording studio. You had to go to a real studio, and we both fell in love with that aspect of it as
Yeah,
well.
being in the studio.
Being in the studio and recording, and what you could do with the equipment and the gear and what have you.
I mean, the funny thing is, we took that tape, a song called Censored, um, and it was kind of a very proggy Genesis-y thing, right? And we went to New York City, and we took it to Genesis's management, because we were just, we can only do this when you're 22. We have
No boundaries.
no boundaries. And we just walked in this guy's office, played him the one song we'd written. Walter O'Brien was his name. And it was finished. I said, so do you want us to sign something? And his mouth just dropped. And years later, he's the guy that signed us to Relativity Records, looked me in the eyes. He was the label guy. He remembered us. He said, I never forgot, these two skinny guys from Canada showed up in my office and had the nerve to ask me if I wanted to sign the deal after one song. He said, I never forgot that. They were just so certain that I should sign them. And he eventually did, actually, years later. But that was really just, we didn't know any better. You're young, I don't know, we just thought, here we go. This is a great song. Of course, we could write more if you need them, but isn't one enough?
There's nothing wrong with having a little bit of attitude, but if I wasn't already a big enough fan of this record and of you guys, there you go. There's the Genesis.
Oh my God.
Nice. Alrighty.
So as soon as you mentioned that tie-in, I was very excited. This is the late 70s or early 80s. You mentioned this pseudo dance kind of thing that was going on in the early 80s with you guys. What was it that you were listening to in the 70s? I mean, was it the Zeppelins? Was it the...
Well, it was prog right up until the Nevermind the Bollocks. I mean, we were listening to, yes. I mean, yes, there was Bowie. We were always huge fan of Dave. Well, probably Bowie's our biggest hero. But we were listening to a lot of Yes, Genesis, all that sort of stuff, Jethro Tull. I was a big fan of Deep Purple. And this guy from England we knew came over, David Oxley, and he said, well, get rid of all this shit. And he took our tapes and threw them out the window and said, listen to this. And he put on a cassette of Nevermind the Bollocks by the Sex Pistols. He said, this is what's coming.
He was a British guy. He was
so we started hanging. We eventually started going and hanging around New York and New Jersey and going to the clubs, and we realized he was dead right. This is what was coming. So we came back to Ottawa, chopped off our hair, threw out our flare pants, got rid of our scarves and our silk dragon bathrobes, and decided that the new wave.
Ross had one. Ross did have.
I actually had one, just like Rush. I had a black kimono, black dragon kimono I used to wear on stage. We just realized this was not where music was going, so we went to Toronto. We moved to Toronto and sort of got in the underground punk new wave scene there, and that was sort of and then grew out and then grew back out of that. But it was pretty obvious. I mean, we both grew up on rock and roll. It wasn't a big jump to go back into something that was not quite so proggy.
When that first disappointment happens, you mentioned record company and all that stuff that happened that first time that sort of put the brakes on things then. A lot of people wouldn't have come back from that. I mean, they just would have said, I'm done, and that's it.
They're stubborn.
Yeah, is that it? Is it just stubbornness? Is it just you guys were that determined?
We had. I wanted to quote David loves to quote Arnold Schwarzenegger. Don't have a plan B. We had no plan B. There was no plan B. It was make or break it. if
Well,
we weren't
the other thing I would say too is, I mean, we were living the rock and roll lifestyle. We lived in a warehouse in Toronto, um, which was the thing at the time. They were wonderful. There were all kinds of cheap places you could live, have a giant, unheated warehouse room,
100
and these
bucks.
warehouses were just filled with other artists and other bands. It was very exciting, a very exciting time, early '80s in Toronto. And the other thing is the songs were still coming. So I mean, it wasn't that we felt, oh, we've got to come up with some songs. It was just a day-to-day thing. We kept coming up with these tunes. So it wasn't a question of feeling defeated by the record business. Is we got to do something with these.
Yeah.
They're still coming. We got to do something with them.
I mean, in fact, look, the Look Me in the Eyes record was self-financed
Yeah.
because we were having trouble getting labels to get interest in us, because we weren't doing the usual, go to Halifax and go to the road for 2 years and then get a record. We felt the songs were good enough. And so I said to Dave one day, we had a meeting. I said, look, we got to put a record. I don't care what we do. We got to put something out. So God bless Dave's girlfriend at the time, Patty. Her mother loaned us the $3,000 to make the record, to make Look Me in the Eyes, to hire the producers, Brian Ainsworth and Mike McCarty, who had done the Kings. So they had just done Switch into Glide,
Yeah.
which was top 10 in America. So they were like on top of the world, and they had heard a tape from a drummer we knew. First thing we made him do was fire the drummer, but that was
That's one of the corpses we're not going to talk about.
But we paid for it ourselves and we put it out, and sure to God it went to number one. So we followed that pattern most of our career, was that we really, if the record industry wasn't going to pay attention, we just go off and do it ourselves, and they'd eventually catch on. So it was very much a do-it-yourself attitude.
Brian Allen, who was at the time with, well, I don't know if at the exact time, but he had been with Toronto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a very different sound than you guys, a little bit more heart headpinsy kind of guitar sound. But
Yeah, it was Toronto guitar rock. I would call it '70s. Well, it may have been in the '70s actually. I
at the
don't know.
beginning, yeah, Head On and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, he's the one who, I don't know if he necessarily did it, but he's the one who he was on a board of governors or something for Attic Records, or
He was the
He was the A&R man. He
no,
was the A&R man, and he was the guy who went to bat for us
he loved us.
at Attic Records. He
He
signed
loved
it.
us. Brian
Yeah,
loved
and,
us.
and we liked it. We got on as friends, and
Brian was a great guy. I have nothing bad to say about Brian. I'll never will. He backed the band. He went to bat for the band with even though the label Attic really did not want to sign us. Al Mayer didn't like what the band was doing. The marketing guys were confused by what we were, and Brian just went to bat and said, no, these guys write great songs. Great songs are the foundation of successful acts. These guys can write. We're going to sign them. And Brian really spearheaded that at Attic Records.
and it was Brian that got you in touch with Terry Brown, the producer of the record.
Yeah, we back in those days, in order to get the CanCon sticker on an album, you needed to have the album had to be produced by someone who was a Canadian citizen in order to get SERPA money, which was government money. And Al Mayer sat on the board of SERPA. Quite a lot of entanglement going on there, and so we had to have a Canadian producer. So we were told we had a choice. We could either have Terry Brown or what's the guy from Vancouver, Dave, that did. There was another guy, not Bob Rock. There was somebody else who did Chilliwack, a guitar player from Chilliwack.
Bill Henderson.
And Brian had just done a Blue Rodeo.
Oh, okay.
And he just finished that. So we're like, well, let's get that guy. I mean, Steve Lillywhite was interested in producing us, but Al Mayer said no.
Yeah,
only way of you
that would have been an interesting sounding record.
But because there were other producers who had heard our tapes, to our friend Walter, so it had to be a Canadian. But we loved, when we first met Terry, we loved Terry. We thought Terry was great. We got along with Terry, saw eye to eye with him, so that was an easy choice actually. But yeah, Brian brought Terry in.
I've always been a big fan of Rough Trade, and Terry worked with them, so that's.
And yeah, the first thing, we loved Terry because the first meeting we had with Al Mayer, Al said something about, well, we're only going to spend so much money on the first record, we'll spend a lot more on the second record. And Terry basically said, F you, I'm only producing the first one. I don't care what you spend on the second one. And we just thought this was the greatest thing in the world. He told the record company to get lost. We thought, we like this guy.
Well, songwriting. We mentioned songwriting. Obviously, you two pride yourselves on as being songwriters, and I don't know if it's songwriters first and musicians second. Well, you have to be one to be the other. I can't say it enough that for this record, for me, melodically, lyrically, hooks all in the right places, everything. Does that, as writers, do you two come in with, do you guys work together? Do you write together or do you come in with separate songs and then sort of finish them?
Well, the way it sort of developed was between Body Shock and this 1983 and the last single we did Out of New York. There was this 4 years between that and Edge of the Shadow and prepping for Edge of the Shadow. And at that point, I was really into music hardware and what have you. I was working at Steve's Music Store in Toronto, which was definitely a hotbed of talent and people who were interested in equipment and what have you. And we slowly basically put together, because of that contact and various other things, we basically put together a home recording studio, like a good one, because the equipment was just starting to develop where you could actually, without mortgaging your house, not that I had a house then, you could actually afford to slowly build up gear. So we basically became self-sufficient as far as we could make really good sounding demo tapes with the gear that we had. And that was in the house that we were both living in. So it was really just sort of living, breathing it. I would come up with melodies or bits or beats or grooves, whatever. That would spark something with Ross. He'd have an idea, and we just sort of, it just became sort of a factory, really. And some of the songs obviously didn't stand the test of time, but we were sort of churning them out. And I would say Edge of the Shadow is basically sort of the best 12 songs that came out of that period, which is why, I mean, I agree that it is a good caliber of songwriting on that, because we didn't want, and at the time in the 80s, it was kind of acceptable to have one hit, maybe a second hit on an album. And then a lot of bands didn't put much effort into the remainder of the album. It was just a vehicle for a couple of good singles, And we wanted to no, let's make every track.
Every song should be a single. That was our motto.
Oh, let's make every track good.
Every song should be as good enough to be a single. That was our motto.
I was just about to say that there's not a song on here that probably couldn't have been released.
In fact, there were advocates for even the songs that I consider the worst on the record, which I won't name. There were advocates at the record label to release it as a single. Like we literally, and in some ways, did our job too well. It would have been easier to focus the record if there'd been three clear. Well, we basically said to the record label, look, you all think there's 12 singles on this. You're wrong. Here are the 4 songs that are the key songs to the album. I.B.U, Shangri-La, Give Me Your Love, and Ain't It a Shame. We said those are the 4 that are the centerpiece of this album. The rest are good songs, but those are the keys. And those actually, those were the songs the label eventually released as singles. But initially they were, no, we want this. And I said, no, you're wrong. We know our own songs. These are the ones that are the best songs.
Well, I hope my favorites on the record aren't the ones you don't like. But
what is it? I won't burst.
For me, I mean, obviously the singles I loved, but I was always Minutes to Midnight. Justine, I thought Justine was great, and being a ballad guy back in the day, Goodbye for me is
Goodbye is my favorite song.
Yeah, in some ways that's the best song.
Goodbye is my favorite, personally, my favorite song on that album, as far as being unique and truthful and
there's nothing in every. I mean, because it's funny, a short diversion, but I love Minute to Midnight, great song. I called Dave yesterday and I said, Dave, and he goes, what is it? I go, listen.
Excuse me for one sec.
Listen, and I said, ooh, my angel, ooh, my girl, time is up on this violent world, which isn't the lyrics in the song. We had the third line I changed. I said, I finally figured out what the stupid line was supposed to be. So, but that still goes on, like even to today, but the Dream Song or Goodbye, we called it the Dream Song. To me, there's not a single note or lyric or foot put wrong in that song. From the second it starts to the end, to me,
it has a space. It tells a story. It has a space.
And it wraps you up. It's interesting. I Kissed in the Rain Light, all that stuff, right? It's extremely personal in the sense that I know exactly for me who that's. And the other song too, I think. I mean, Justine is.
Yeah.
In terms of you asked about writing songs, I mean, I was reading something called the Alexandria Quartet, one of the books in it's called Justine. Jeff Slimkowski, our friend, would know that. And I came downstairs and Dave was in the kitchen at our place and he had his guitar and he was playing this thing going da 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 dee. What's that? He goes, I just wrote this. Oh, that's really catchy. It's really nice. Do you have any words? He goes, no. Often Dave would have a few words, like a bit of a chorus or even a title a lot of the time, actually. And I said, well, I just wrote this. And I threw these lyrics for Justine on the table. He just looked at them and sang them. And that's basically the songs you hear today. It literally just fell out of the sky and dropped on us out of nowhere.
I'm glad it did. I don't know how many girls I played goodbye for, and like that. When I'm listening to the record, it's from beginning to end. But whenever I have it on my phone or whatever, it's always starts with goodbye. That's the song that I'm going to.
And that's why we ended the album with it. We thought that goodbye kind of was the perfect.
Is it the last? It's not the last song on the album, is it?
Yeah, it's the last song.
It is the last song.
That's the last song side to it. So we just thought that was the perfect way to sort of wrap it up. And that song actually is closer in a way. It bridges a lot of the other stuff we did, even though it's kind of a what they call it, dream pop, I think someone called it.
Yeah.
That it has all the elements in it that I like about Roman Gray, which is the lyrics. It has a bit of a polyrhythm going. It's got some really interesting space.
There's a lot of sonic room for the vocal too, which in a lot of our stuff, being 80s music, it's very compact sonically, so the vocal is just one of the things sitting in there. Whereas Goodbye and Justine too, there's lots of room.
Well, actually, when we were doing Goodbye in our studio, we were sitting there and struggling with it because we had acoustic guitars and drums and bass and it was full of all this stuff, and we were sitting there going, it's just not working. This sucks. This should be great. And so we said, well, let's just start from scratch. Let's just take everything out. And so we just put up the congas and the acoustic guitar. And suddenly it was like, wait a minute. That's it. It doesn't need all that crap. So we stripped it down to nothing and then just added back in sort of more of the ambient type tracks. And then we brought the drums, of course, and the guitars in for the bridge, which is a nice dynamic. But it literally was just pull it down, and it was almost by accident. We just kind of put up the faders and went, wow, that works. So let's go with that. And that's something we rarely did, was leave that amount of room in a mix.
Sometimes the simpler the better, right? I was always waiting. You mentioned the last song on the album was Goodbye. I was always waiting for the next one, which was going to be the album number 2, which never came. The shift was happening around that time in the early 90s to the grunge and the boy bands, the hip.
What do they call it? Alt rock, like Blue Rodeo was part of that roots revival.
Roots rock, and but I mean, for the most part, it was the Alice in Chains and the Backstreet Boys and MC Hammer and stuff like that was coming out. So, did you guys at that point, was there ever? I don't know. I don't want to get, like you said earlier, I don't want to get into the record company stuff. But
okay,
well, you're on the road with Joe Cocker. You're opening for Joe Cocker. You're opening for Haywire. You're out on the road doing some stuff, and then all of a sudden the wheels kind of fall off at the record company standpoint. So what kept you going at that point, and why didn't we ever get the disc?
Well, I mean, as far as the record company goes, they put a lot of money into that album. I would say that album they probably paid too much for it for various reasons. Not that it went into our pockets, but Attic was a small label. It was an expensive record to make, the videos to make. And I think they were just, oh my God, we spent, and the album didn't sell very well. I thank you for selling, a good 20% of them.
It sold really, really well in Bramalea, Ontario, I'll tell you that.
So the record company was not interested in a second record. Because it's just the economics of it. They spent all this money and it didn't sell. Now there's reasons for that. One of the promotion was terrible. You were saying how record companies would give you, leaders, and the rep of the record company would come in. This is in the 80s and 70s, give you a record. Hey, listen to this. Ross and I went for a promotion with one of the A&R guys from Attic in, I don't know, somewhere in Southern Ontario, London, or something like that. Guy called Steve Waxman, who we both really liked. This is not anything bad about Steve Waxman, but it was like Spinal Tap. We go, it's an in-store, and we go to this in-store. They don't have our records in the
No
store.
record.
So if anyone turned up and really did like Roman Gray, they wouldn't have been able to buy an album or a tape or a cassette. Like it was just a comedy of errors. It
I
was
mean,
just an absolute clown show.
IBU was a top 10 song at rock radio. The first release off the album. They did not release the album until 2 months after IBU was a hit song. People were going into record stores going, there's this song by this new band, I.B.U something. They're like, never heard of it. They literally did not. I asked the marketing guy once. I said, what's with this? He goes, well, we didn't think it would be a hit, so we didn't put the record in the store yet. We were going to put it in for Shangri-La. I'm like, you morons! This song was top 10. Like it was on every radio. It was on
So much
Q107.
music, it was heavy
It was
rotation.
everywhere, and people could not buy the record. So that really, and that kind of, they fumbled their way through most of that process. It just was not. And then the other thing David didn't mention, but what happened was that we had known from Look Me in the Eyes that if we ever got another record deal, there would be a massive European publishing deal available. Massive. We knew that.
Yeah.
So what was part of our deal was we'd get, half of any publishing money. Well, they did. Ada got a massive publishing deal from Europe for the Roman Gray record, $1 million, which they gave us nothing. By contract, we were supposed to get 50%. And their logic was, well, we spent $500,000 on the record. We didn't get it back. So we're just going to take your half of the publishing as compensation. Sue us if you don't like it. So that really is why there wasn't a second record, because financially we were destroyed, because we had toured based on the fact that we were told this money was coming. And so we, went heavily in debt to finance tours, assuming we were going to pay it off shortly, and we never did. So that really, there were other reasons, but that really, was the, added, Al was happy, he got his $500,000 back. As far as he was concerned, that was great. I got my money back. You guys can go sign to another company if you want, really, basically is what he said. Get out of here. I don't want you. But we were just exhausted from touring and the money problems, and just kind of said, that's it. And that's why there's no second record. It's really right at the gates of success. The whole thing jammed.
And it was the second time, right? Because you had the issues with the record company the first time. So yeah, I don't blame you for all that.
So I mean, the thing is, that's the record business. I mean, we talk about this all the time. I don't blame anybody for what they did. Like, it is what it is. The record business is not a real business. It's tough. You read every biography, every band that's ever lived. They've all been through the same thing, and you just pick yourself up again. You keep going. We just couldn't pick ourselves up for the third time. Like we'd done it the first time, and then the second time, and we just didn't have it in us for another go at it.
What has life been like since then? I mean, professionally, obviously you've gotten older. We've all gotten older. We've all gotten a little balder and fatter. What have you got?
Full head of hair under here.
Is there?
Yeah.
You guys have been continued writing songs. Are obviously still close friends. Still work together. I understand you've done a lot of stuff for upcoming artists, like mentored upcoming artists.
Yeah, I do that. And, that's kind of what I do, because I remember being a young songwriter with no money,
Mhm.
and how significant it was, just an opportunity to make tapes, make demo tapes, and get a shot. So I have a home studio, and I just bring in young artists who don't have any money, and I say, okay, let's record some songs. You don't have to pay me. Pay me if you become a star or whatever. And then Dave helps me mix it and produce it. Is really just a more of trying to, because we've accumulated this vast storehouse of knowledge between us. How to write songs, how to write lyrics, how to produce, how to record, all that stuff. It's just a shame if that just gets lost for all time, if nobody benefits from it. So that's what I do. I'm going to give that all back. I'm perfectly happy to do it. I wish somebody had done that when we were 22, but there you go.
I want to thank you guys so much. Bill Wood, who was around in I.I. around the same time as you guys, he was the
I remember I.I. Yeah.
He's been a member of our group for 5 years now, and I've gotten to know him pretty well. And he, the way he talks about music now and the passion that he has going out and playing small clubs with the band that he's in now, and no record deal, no pressure, no nothing. It's just about the music. So I think it's fantastic that you guys are still, all about the music and still involved in it. I want to thank you guys so much for being with me. This, from a personal standpoint, like I've said a million times during this interview, this record has always been one of my absolute
Hey,
favorites.
don't you need a signed copy?
I would love a signed copy because
Okay.
I've had this for 35 years. It would be nice.
Well, if you can send us the cover, we'll sign it and send it back. There were a lot of people like you who really liked that record. I still see it on the YouTube, right? I see people going, "Whatever happened to these?" The question is always, "What happened to them?" Right? Which is,
And that's what I was hoping to get answers to, quite honestly.
did you get an answer?
I 100% got an answer, and it's not.
Yeah, I don't mean to be critical of anybody or anybody in the business that did anything. They all do things for their own reason. It's just,
it's a business.
We had some. I changed very little of it actually, other than maybe a couple of things. It is, we went to the mountain. We got to the top in our minds, right? That we set out when we were 21 to make albums and tour and be on TV, and and we did it. So at the end of the day, a lot of my more talented friends didn't.
You've got a whole bunch of people in the Bramalea area that.
Good, thank you. Listen, I just want to put a quick plug in for anyone who's interested. On YouTube, there's remixes of the song I.B.U. and Minute to Midnight that are they're good. So give them. I'll send you the link. But for the fans out there, check those out on YouTube.
Yeah, the I.B.U. one is really particularly good because we changed some things that we didn't like what was done, and I'm way happier with it.
Are there any plans to do any other remixes from any of the other songs?
I said there are plans.
There are plans.
There are plans, and I'll let you know. We're gonna have a go at Ain't It a Shame.
Ain't It a Shame, because we think the song's way better than the mix. So we want to have another crack at that. But really, we're dealing with an existing master, so it's more supplemental recording. We can't record from scratch, which would be ideal, but.
Well, I want to thank you guys for being with me. It's nice to, after all these years, to get a more personal perspective of an album that I've listened to thousands of times. So I wish you all the best. I wish you and your families a great
Scott. Really
great, Scott. Thanks a million.
Thanks for doing this.
No
thanks
problem.
to Jeff, because Jeff's probably going to watch it. So thanks, Jeff, for setting
Thanks,
this up.
Jeff. And Heather, thank you, Heather.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you, guys. Take care.